had President Lunga of Zambia, who passed on the 5th of June 2025. As Africans should be laid to his place in a respectable manner. I thank the legal representatives for meaningfully having a discussion about this serious matter and reaching an agreement as to how the legal process would go forward should the parties not reach an agreement.
The Lungu family says honoring the wishes of the former president is their greatest interest.
And if it calls for us to bury in South Africa for the story to be told, so be it.
130 back.
Edgar Chakalungu must be exonerated in his death. Someone needs to speak for him. Those that never spoke for him in his lifetime, this is an opportunity to speak for him, even in his death. Let's not cower. Let's not fear the present regime. Let's not be afraid. Let's stand up for what Edgar Lungu should have stood for, what he stood for, and what he should have continued standing for. There's a public sentiment which is divided. There's a propaganda machinery that has been put in place by the government to paint him black even in his death. To
1 minute back.
Executing him even in his death. But those who love him would rather he be given a dignified send-off. President Hakainde Hichilema is incapable of giving President Edgar Lungu a dignified send-off. It will be a mockery. It would be a mockery. The insistence of him having to body view, as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, today a strange question came from the judge to say, suppose the president wanted to view the body. Would that be acceptable? And obviously the answer is no.
Should the two sides not find each other in the coming days, they'll have to file their respective papers in July in the same court. That process will lead up to the official court hearing, which is set for the 4th of August 2025.
7,
For News from Africa,
5,
Channel
4.
5, I'm Ziliko Mhlaba in Pretoria.
Well, as we continue to react to that particular issue, we are joined by Zambian main opposition party's Patriotic Front Secretary General, Mr. Raphael Nakachinda, is in studio with us. Mr. Nakachinda, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a tumultuous period for the party and also for the family. But I'm keen to hear just the initial reaction that you get as a party to what we heard in court today, but also when we did hear that the Zambian Attorney General, Mulilo Kabesha, was approaching the courts to halt the burial of the former president in South Africa. What was the initial reaction?
We are somewhat shocked at the insistence and obsession of the government. But of course, it's obsession by the president himself in wanting to process of putting to rest engagements between clear, demands, or at least which were a reflection of the discussed. And in a programs and some of the pronouncements that come from government back home basically buckets or negates all the conditions that were made. And to that effect, when you look at the propaganda machinery, online, media pages or that are run by status, would run very, very disturbing propaganda, stories.
Such as
the fact that the late president with a different identity. He got, a passport from Zimbabwe. They are not even sensitive to what such propaganda would do to our, diplomatic relations with, Zimbabwe. So that, approach only speaks to the fact that our government, wirelessly are trying to, play to the gallery and say they're interested in having his remains sent off to the international community. What is happening on the ground is totally different. He was subjected to when he was alive, that these people amass so much wealth through dubious means, basically theft or corruption, and therefore the decision to try and bury outside the country is because of Central Front and the family, which I think is very, very deceptive and hypocritical.
At the same time, though, to Zambia, there's been a period of mourning. They say they even extended that period of mourning in Zambia. In fact, at the end of that statement, they go on to talk about how Lungu is still very much a statesman who belongs to Zambia and should be buried within the borders of Zambia. So, are you saying that warm statement that we see from Zambia is misleading?
You can only judge the present by examining the historical facts around these sort of issues. First of all, the current president, even when he was in opposition, he never recognized, President Lungu as Republican president. He actually refused, not for 1 month, for a period of 5 years, and then until he got into government. When President Lungu left office, I think the facts are present. Today, for him to open his mouth, all of a sudden, in a dramatic manner, and start pronouncing that President Lungu is a statesman, is hypocritical. The issue is not just a standoff between the family and the government on the basis of the fact that President Lungu was mistreated. I think that is narrowing the argument. There are a number of fundamental issues that have gone wrong in Zambia, to which the family at this particular point are basically just contributing to the fact that can we open a conversation? Taking President Lungu to Zambia to be buried, does it change the issues that we're dealing with as a country? And here in South Africa, you had the issue of apartheid at some point. You had people in exile in Zambia. We hosted, the headquarters of ANC was in Zambia. And some of the comrades and freedom fighters died in Zambia, buried in Zambia.
Indeed, and I'm going to challenge you, Mr. Nakachinga. Yes, they did, and that is correct.
Yeah, correct.
That was not at that point when we were talking about a former statesman, which is a completely different thing. So maybe let's talk about the diplomatic sensitivities. The spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa talked about what a difficult position this puts South Africa in, because this is going to be the first time a former statesman or a statesman is buried in South Africa from outside, a statesman of another country. The question for Durko was, what do we do? Do we partake in the funeral? Do we lay a South African flag over his remains? Because that is the protocols that we have. So what do you say about those diplomatic governmental sensitivities?
Unless people are not paying attention to the issues around President Lungu, you are a person crossing the status of a former president that needs to be buried in a dignified manner, without paying attention to the fact that up to a point of him dying, he was stripped off of all these courtesies that we're trying to pronounce at this particular point. So don't you think that outside just moving forward and saying let's bury in a dignified manner, as people are trying to suggest, that we need first of all to address what has led to where we are today, and the choice of the family to say, I think in this case we don't want to participate in advancing and perpetuating this hypocrisy, because it's destroying the very fabric of a nation. A nation needs to be founded on very strong, values. The values of, truth. The values, in this case, where democracy, where institutions of government must be respected. Where, for example, the courts, the parliament, and all all these institutions that are critical to be able to keep a nation, balanced and having freedoms and rights of citizens respected. Should we just, accord this government, an opportunity without being interrogated around this issue that will not only cure the abuse of the rights and freedoms of President Lungu, but the abuse and rights of citizens in the Republic of Zambia? So it's bigger than just barring.
Right.
So everybody who's interested in dealing with the Zambian situation must be able to examine this matter in a broader sense, so that we'll be able to accept that there is something fundamentally wrong about Zambia. One of the reasons why people are reluctant to interrogate is because Zambia for over 50 something to 60 years has had a clean slate. We have been pioneers and leading on, in many areas. We've been in the forefront in terms of advocating for peace in the region. We've been first in terms of introduction of multi-party democracy. Then a number of positive things that Zambia has been able, to achieve and has been celebrated in the region and on the continent. Now, the dark side of what is happening now is shocking and people can't believe. So when we are raising these concerns, when President Lungu was raising this concern, people can't believe. This doesn't really speak to the Zambia. We know.
Is it not the loss of the legacy then of a former statesman that you believe in, his ideals, right? As a representative of the Patriotic Front, that it is a loss of legacy for him to be buried in another country. So let's say that the family is able to have the green light on their wishes to have former President Lungu buried in South Africa. Would he be buried as a normal citizen?
I think understanding where the family is coming from, it's not actually the loss of a legacy. It is a demand that the legacy of President Edgar Lungu not be rubbished. Can you let the world know, let the Zambian people know who this man is, not in the lenses or through the lenses of the propaganda of the UPND government. Now President Echet is coming to the party and beginning to accept that which he has not accepted for many years. And he's accepting now conveniently because for him, closure to this issue as quickly as possible works for him. And we're saying we cannot put closure, and I think that's what the family is also saying, we cannot put closure to this matter in the manner that he wishes it to close. Because it's not about him. He is only president for a period of time. It's about the country. The damage the man is causing to a number of issues that are fundamental for the country. If not stopped at this particular point, soon, even those who are, today are looking at these issues just from a perspective that they're, internal issues of Zambia, the new issues of Zambia. But if anything happens in Zambia, it will affect the region.
Yes.
It will affect the continent.
Yes.
And we're saying, can we all pay attention to what's going on in Zambia? The burial of President Lungu is just an opportunity, I think, through the decision that the family has made, for us to be able to ask ourselves the question, what has gone wrong?
But
How are we
Mr.
getting to a place that now we're having
Yeah.
to bury a former head of state, a statesman, out of, in South Africa instead of
The
in Zambia?
question is, would he be buried in South Africa as a normal citizen and not as a statesman? I ask that because the South African government made available the protocols as per South African governmental protocols to transport him back home as a statesman. So if the family insists that he be buried in South Africa, is he buried in South Africa as a citizen? And that's the clarity that as a normal citizen and not as a statesman.
I think the family has made it very clear. They have never demanded for anything outside the fact that up to the point of death, the gentleman was just like a private citizen. He, up to the time of death, like a private citizen.
Okay.
And to that effect, there's nobody who has demanded anything. But having been president, they are fellow presidents, or some of them are sitting, others who are former presidents, who know President Lungu because they worked with him over regional matters, continental matters, and global matters. They know who he is. And they will be reluctant to fall for the propaganda coming from Zambia, at least from the ruling party and the government from there. And they'll be wanting to, treat him and honor him based on what they know of him. But we're saying, as much as you are interested to do that, and I think even South Africa has done that, because they appreciate the input this man has made, not only on the regional level, the continental level, and therefore there's this compelling, desire that he needs to be honored, and it's highly appreciated. If he was just some dictator, some a leader that really didn't espouse values that would be appreciated in the region, I don't think South Africa would have even found itself in an awkward position. You know, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. The only reason South Africa is saying we're in an awkward position is because they do know that President Lungu deserves honor. In Zambia, that is not the position.
After the sitting in court today, and we played it in the clip a little bit earlier, CBD, a family member saying one of the concerns for the family is the remains of the former president make their way back to Zambia, and that President Chilema asks to view the body. What is the biggest concern about that possible request as is raised by the family member?
I think there's raised issues that, or maybe concerns that I may not be competent to discuss around the desire and obsession that the president will have, you know, to view the body, to be the first one to view the body, and maybe have some indication from the program that they've come out, some kind of private session, you know, around the, you know, all that process. Because somehow it begins to delve into superstition, which is really a subject that I'm not want to.
That's not a subject we want to get into. But there is the issue of cultural sensitivity.
Yeah, there are cultural sensitivities.
Someone made the point that we are Africans, that we have cultural sensitivities.
Yes, around all these issues.
Right. The former president's been passed since the 5th of June. It's been 20 days. And now, according to the courts, they're going to sit again in August. So more time that the former president's remains will be not laid to rest. Is that a cultural concern for the family, Shirley?
Well, I think we have a process which is in court. Outside discussing cultural concerns and so on, for the party, and I think for me as Secretary General, I see that this presents an opportunity to reflect and look at the issues. Not just these people wanting to outdo each other in terms of sentiments and narratives and propaganda and all that. What has led us to reach here? That's a question that President HH must ask and answer. And if we're serious about, you know, curing some of the issues that have led us to this place, a process of conversation around this matter will start. The negotiations, for example, between the family and government have been purely around wanting to reduce this as though it's government trying to appease the family for them to, you know, participate or basically take charge of the burial process. But the issues that President Lungu, you know, for which he came out of retirement and, you know, into active politics, for him to even sacrifice his life, even at a point of his weakness, even when surely death seemed to have been knocking at the door, but he was still resolute that he needed to contribute. Those are the issues that we should be able to discuss and be able to resolve. Because how would you, justify that a man would say, I don't think this is a country I would want to go back to. I don't think this is a government I would want that even participate in wanting to the hypocritical, attitude that we seem to have in our country. That somebody will be demonized to their death, and then in their death, people are beginning to celebrate that person. I remember something I think that on the continent was quite appreciated about, our mother here, Mama Winnie Mandela, when she died. My good friend, Malema, was given an opportunity to speak. He seemed to have he had the courage to call out some of the people who he felt that even the songs of praise and all the statements and so on that they were presenting over somebody they were demonizing all this while were hypocritical. It raised the debate. It is in the same spirit that we're saying, wait a minute, if the family has gone to this length to say they will not betray their father, she will not betray her husband, they will not betray their uncle in terms of budging to some of the things that he held dear up to the point of his death. Don't we then as a nation, collectively, including Wisaka and Echilema, sit back and reflect what has gone wrong? Why are we treating each other like this? What are some of the fundamental issues that we need to correct? not for the sake of Edgar Chagwanungu, but for the sake of the future. And I think that's the direction should be taken.
Nakachinda, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll be watching the engagements between yourselves, the Lungu family, as well as the Zambian government very closely, of course, even as it plays out in the court. Thank you for availing yourself once again.
Thank you and good evening.
Mr. Raphael Nakachinda there, who is the Secretary General of the Patriotic Front. All right, you're still watching Newsweek PM. The latest edition. Please stay with us. We've got your headlines at the top.